The massive space station Unity Prime floated in the darkness between stars like a giant metal city. Its gleaming silver walls stretched for miles in every direction. Thousands of windows dotted its surface, each one glowing with warm light from within. Ships from dozens of different worlds came and went from its many docking bays, their engines creating trails of blue and white fire against the black void of space. Inside the station, the main commercial district buzzed with activity. Alien beings of every shape and size walked through the wide corridors. Some had multiple arms and legs. Others floated instead of walking. A few were so tall they had to duck under the ceiling lights. The air was filled with the sounds of different languages being spoken and translated by small devices that everyone wore. Lieutenant Commander Hyun-woo walked slowly through the busy corridor with his security team. He was a human from Earth, one of only 50 humans currently living on Unity Prime. His dark hair was cut short in military style, and he wore a simple blue uniform with the Earth symbol on his shoulder. At 32 years old, he had spent 10 years as a Navy SEAL before being chosen for this important job. The human team was small, compared to the security forces from other worlds. Most alien species had hundreds or even thousands of representatives on the station, but Earth was new to the Galactic Coalition. Only 3 months had passed since humans first made contact with the greater galaxy. Most aliens still saw humans as primitive newcomers from a backward planet on the edge of civilized space. Hyun-woo did not mind being overlooked. In his SEAL training, he had learned that being underestimated was often an advantage. He watched everything around him with calm, alert eyes. His team moved like shadows behind him, 3 other former Navy SEALs who had been specially selected for this assignment. The station operated under coalition law, which meant that conflicts between species were supposed to be resolved peacefully. But Hyun-woo knew that peace was often fragile. Different species had different ideas about honor, respect, and personal space. Small misunderstandings could quickly become dangerous situations. As they rounded a corner near the main marketplace, Hyun-woo saw Ji-hai walking toward them. She was a human diplomat, one of the most important people in Earth's delegation. She carried a sealed case containing trade agreements that had taken months to negotiate. The documents inside could determine whether Earth would gain access to advanced medical technology that could save millions of lives. Ji-hai was young for such an important job, only 28 years old, but she was brilliant at languages and understanding alien cultures. Her black hair was pulled back in a neat style, and she wore the formal diplomatic uniform of Earth. She moved with confidence through the crowd of aliens, most of whom towered over her small frame. But as she approached the main intersection, a massive figure stepped directly into her path. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall with 4 powerful arms extending from a body covered in natural armor. Its skin looked like black metal plates that had grown together over millions of years of evolution. This was a hegemony warrior, one of the most feared military species in the galaxy. The hegemony had controlled galactic warfare for over 2,000 years. Their soldiers were enhanced from birth with biomechanical improvements that made them faster, stronger, and more deadly than almost any other species. They served as peacekeepers, enforcers, and soldiers throughout Coalition space. Most aliens feared and respected them in equal measure. This particular warrior wore the red markings of a combat veteran. His name was Vextar, according to the identification tag that glowed on his chest armor. He had fought in dozens of battles across the galaxy and had never been defeated in single combat. His multiple eyes focused on the small human diplomat with what looked like amusement. Ji-hai stopped walking and bowed politely, as was proper when meeting a hegemony warrior. She spoke in careful, measured words. "Honored warrior, I request passage to continue my duties for the Earth delegation." Vextar's translator device crackled to life, converting his response into standard galactic language. "Earth delegation," he said with a sound like grinding metal. "The primitive newcomers who think they belong among civilized species." A crowd began to gather around them. Aliens of various species slowed their walking to watch what was happening. Some seemed curious, while others looked worried. Conflicts involving hegemony warriors rarely ended peacefully for the other party. "I mean no disrespect," Ji-hai replied, keeping her voice calm and steady. "I simply need to deliver these documents to the Coalition Trade Office." The warrior laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the corridor. "Your soft flesh species thinks it can negotiate with real civilizations. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no enhancements. You are weak creatures from a weak world. From his position 30 meters away, Hyunwoo began moving toward the confrontation. His team spread out automatically, taking positions that would allow them to respond quickly if needed. But they moved slowly and carefully, trying not to attract attention to themselves. The translator on Vextar's chest continued to broadcast his words as he circled around Ji-Hai like a predator. Perhaps you need to learn your place in the galaxy. Perhaps your species needs a reminder of what happens to those who overreach their abilities. Ji-Hai tried to step around the warrior, moving to her left toward the trade office entrance. But Vextar moved with her, blocking her path again. His biomechanical enhancements hummed quietly as they powered up. Ready for action? Please allow me to pass, Ji-Hai said, her diplomatic training keeping her voice steady even as the situation became more dangerous. That was when Vextar made his mistake. With one of his massive hands, he shoved Ji-Hai backward. The force of the push was enough to lift her off her feet and send her sliding across the smooth floor. Her case of documents scattered as she struggled to regain her balance. The watching crowd gasped in shock. Physical violence against diplomatic personnel was strictly forbidden under coalition law, but hegemony warriors were rarely punished for their actions, especially against species they considered inferior. Hyunwoo stepped forward from the crowd, his movements smooth and deliberate. His voice carried clearly through the corridor as he spoke in perfect galactic standard, Vextar of the hegemony. You will stand down immediately and allow the diplomat to continue her duties. The massive warrior turned to face this new challenger, all four of his eyes focusing on the small human. Vextar was nearly twice Hyunwoo's height and probably 4 times his weight. His natural armor could stop most weapons, and his enhanced strength could crush bones like twigs. Another soft flesh creature, Vextar said, his translator broadcasting his words to the growing crowd. Do you think your pathetic biology makes you a match for a hegemony warrior? Hyunwoo helped Ji-Hai to her feet and made sure she was not injured. Then he turned back to face Vextar with calm, steady eyes. I think you should apologize to the lady and step aside. The alien warrior's biomechanical systems began to power up with a sound like engines starting. His multiple arms moved into combat positions that had been perfected over centuries of warfare. The crowd backed away, expecting to witness a brief and brutal demonstration of hegemony superiority over the primitive newcomers from Earth. But Hyunwoo did not back down. He stood perfectly still, watching his opponent with the patience of a man who had been trained to face impossible odds and find a way to win. The corridor fell silent except for the quiet humming of Vextar's biomechanical enhancements. The massive hegemony warrior stood in the center of the space, his forearms moving in slow, practiced patterns. Each movement was designed to intimidate and confuse opponents who had never faced such a creature before. Hyunwoo remained perfectly still, his hands relaxed at his sides. To most observers, he looked completely outmatched. The human was barely 6 feet tall and weighed less than 200 pounds. Vextar towered over him like a living mountain of armor and enhanced muscle. The crowd of aliens pressed against the walls of the corridor, creating a wide circle around the two fighters. Some species had never seen a hegemony warrior in combat before. Others whispered to each other about how quickly this confrontation would end. A few began placing bets on how long the human would last before being crushed. Ji-Hai had moved to safety behind Hyunwoo's security team, but she watched with worried eyes. She knew that Hyunwoo was a former Navy SEAL, but that training seemed useless against a creature that could tear through metal with its bare hands. Vextar's translator crackled as he spoke. I will make this quick, soft flesh. Your species needs to learn respect for their superiors. The warrior's combat systems finished powering up with a sound like engines reaching full speed. Red lights began blinking along his armor as his enhanced biology flooded his body with combat chemicals. His strength increased to levels that could bend steel beams. His speed doubled, then tripled beyond what any unenhanced being could match. But Hyunwoo had faced impossible odds before. During his time as a SEAL, he had learned that the biggest, strongest opponent was not always the most dangerous. Size and strength meant nothing if they could not be used effectively, and every opponent, no matter how powerful, had weaknesses that could be exploited. The human began to move slowly to his right, forcing Vextar to turn to keep him in sight. This gave Hyunwoo a chance to study his opponent's movement patterns. The warrior's forearms moved independently, but they followed predictable sequences based on hegemony combat training. His legs were powerful but designed for straight-line charges rather than quick changes of direction. Vextar grew impatient with the circling. With a roar that echoed through the corridor, he launched himself forward in a devastating charge. His biomechanical legs propelled him across the distance between them in less than a second. All four arms extended toward Hyunwoo, ready to grab and crush the small human. But Hyunwoo was no longer where the warrior expected him to be. At the last possible moment, the human dropped low and rolled to the side. Vextar's charge carried him past his target and into the wall behind where Hyunwoo had been standing. The impact left cracks in the metal wall and sent vibrations through the deck plates. The watching aliens murmured in surprise. Most had expected the human to be flattened in the first few seconds of the fight. Instead, he had avoided the attack completely and was already back on his feet, circling to stay behind the warrior's line of sight. Vextar spun around with fury in his multiple eyes. His combat programming had calculated a 98% chance of victory in the first exchange. No unenhanced being should have been fast enough to avoid his charge. His biomechanical systems began running diagnostic checks to see if something was malfunctioning. The warrior tried a different approach. Instead of charging, he advanced slowly with all four arms spread wide to prevent the human from dodging to either side. His enhanced reflexes would allow him to grab Hyunwoo no matter which direction the human tried to move. Hyunwoo watched the approaching warrior with calm concentration. He had studied the files on hegemony combat doctrine during his preparation for this assignment. Their warriors were trained to fight other species that relied on strength, speed, or natural weapons. They were not prepared for opponents who used intelligence and adaptability as their primary weapons. When Vextar came within range, Hyunwoo did something that surprised everyone watching. Instead of trying to escape or avoid the attack, he stepped forward into the warrior's reach. This put him inside the range where Vextar's long arms were most effective, but it also placed him in a position where the alien could not use his full strength. The warrior grabbed for the human with two of his arms, but Hyunwoo was already moving. He grabbed one of Vextar's wrists and used it as leverage to swing himself around behind the warrior's left side. Before the alien could react, Hyunwoo had applied pressure to a joint in the warrior's elbow that his biomechanical enhancements could not protect. Vextar roared in pain and surprise as his left arm went numb. His combat systems had no reference for this type of attack. In thousands of years of warfare, no opponent had ever targeted the weak points in hegemony joint construction. Most species relied on brute force rather than precision techniques. The warrior spun around and swung his three remaining arms at the human, but Hyunwoo had already moved again. He stayed close to Vextar's body, where the long alien arms could not generate their full power. Each time the warrior tried to grab him, the human was somewhere else, always just outside his reach. The crowd watched in amazement as the small human began to systematically dismantle the hegemony warrior's offensive capabilities. Every movement was precise and purposeful. Hyunwoo targeted joints, pressure points, and nerve clusters that the warrior's armor could not protect. He used Vextar's own size and strength against him, redirecting attacks and using the alien's momentum to throw him off balance. Vextar's biomechanical systems began to overheat from the constant strain of trying to track and capture such an elusive target. Warning lights flashed along his armor as his enhanced muscles worked beyond their designed limits. His combat chemicals were being consumed faster than his body could produce them. The warrior began to panic. Nothing in his training had prepared him for an opponent like this. Humans were supposed to be weak and slow. They had no natural weapons or armor. They should have been easy prey for a hegemony warrior. But this human moved like water, flowing around every attack and striking back with surgical precision. In desperation, Vextar activated his emergency combat protocols. His biomechanical systems flooded his body with enough enhancement chemicals to kill most beings. His strength doubled again, and his speed increased beyond anything the human should be able to match. But the chemicals also clouded his judgment and made his movements less precise. This was exactly what Hyunwoo had been waiting for. The enhanced Vextar was now faster and stronger, but he was also more predictable. The combat chemicals made him aggressive and reckless, overriding the tactical thinking that made hegemony warriors so dangerous. The warrior charged again, this time with all his remaining strength focused into a single devastating attack. All three of his working arms came together in a strike that could have punched through the station's hull. But Hyunwoo was ready for him. The human stepped aside at the last possible moment and grabbed the warrior's leading arm. Using a technique he had learned in underwater combat training, he redirected Vextar's charge into a throw that sent the massive alien crashing to the deck. The impact was so violent that it cracked the metal floor plates and sent shockwaves through the corridor. For a moment, Vextar lay stunned on the deck, his biomechanical system sparking and failing from the overload. The crowd of watching aliens stood in complete silence, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. A human, an unenhanced being from a primitive world, had just defeated one of the galaxy's most feared warriors. But the fight was not over yet. Vextar rolled over on the cracked deck plates, his massive body struggling to coordinate its movements. Sparks flew from damaged circuits in his biomechanical enhancements as his systems tried to reboot themselves. The warrior's four eyes blazed with rage and confusion as he looked up at the human who had somehow managed to put him on the ground. The crowd of alien spectators pressed closer to the walls, their conversations becoming louder as they tried to understand what they were witnessing. Many species had served alongside hegemony warriors in battles across the galaxy. They had seen these enhanced soldiers tear through enemy lines and defeat creatures twice their size, but none had ever seen one struggling against such a small opponent. Hyunwoo stood a few meters away, breathing steadily but showing no signs of exhaustion. His uniform was still neat and properly arranged. His dark hair remained in perfect military order. To most observers, he looked like he had just finished a light training exercise rather than a life-or-death combat with one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. The human's calm demeanor only made Vextar more furious. The warrior's pride had been built over decades of victories against every type of opponent the galaxy could produce. He had defeated armored giants from the Steel Worlds. He had outfought energy beings that could reshape matter with their thoughts. He had even killed a space dragon with nothing but his bare hands and his biomechanical enhancements. But this small, soft creature from a backward planet was making him look like an amateur. Worse, the human was doing it in front of dozens of witnesses who would spread the story throughout the station and beyond. If word of this defeat reached the hegemony homeworlds, Vextar's military career would be finished. The warrior forced himself back to his feet, his damaged systems groaning under the strain. Two of his forearms hung limp at his sides, their control circuits fried by the overload. But his remaining arms still functioned, and his core strength was still far beyond what any unenhanced being should be able to match. Vextar's translator crackled with static as he spoke. "Impossible. Your species has no enhancements, no biomechanical improvements, no genetic modifications. You should not be able to do this." Hyunwoo tilted his head slightly, studying his opponent with the same calm attention he had shown throughout the fight. "We do not need enhancements. We have something better." The warrior's multiple eyes narrowed as he tried to understand what the human meant. Hegemony doctrine taught that technological enhancement was the only path to true combat effectiveness. Every other approach was primitive and inefficient, but the evidence before his eyes suggested that their teachings might be incomplete. Around the corridor, aliens from dozens of different species watched with growing amazement. Most galactic civilizations had abandoned physical combat in favor of energy weapons and technological solutions. The idea that raw fighting skill could overcome advanced enhancements was almost impossible for them to accept. Among the crowd, a group of Zentari observers began recording the encounter with their advanced sensing equipment. The Zentari were known throughout the galaxy for their analytical minds and their ability to spot patterns that others missed. What they were seeing challenged every assumption about combat effectiveness that had guided galactic military thinking for centuries. Vextar activated his backup combat systems, drawing power from his secondary biomechanical reserves. His remaining arms began to glow with energy, as additional strength flowed through his enhanced muscles. The warrior had decided to end this fight with a single, overwhelming attack that would prove hegemony superiority once and for all. The alien warrior gathered himself for another charge, but this time he moved with more caution. His damaged systems had taught him that the human was far more dangerous than he appeared. Instead of rushing forward blindly, Vextar advanced step by step, keeping his remaining arms ready to block or counter any attack. Hyunwoo watched the approaching warrior with the patience of a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His SEAL training had taught him that the most dangerous moment in any fight was when the opponent became desperate. Desperate enemies made unpredictable choices, but they also exposed weaknesses that could be exploited by someone who remained calm and focused. The warrior feinted to the left, then swung his right arm in a wide arc that should have caught the human off guard. But Hyunwoo had already read the attack from the way Vextar shifted his weight. The human ducked under the swinging arm and stepped inside the warrior's reach once again. This time, instead of targeting the alien's joints or pressure points, Hyunwoo went for something more direct. His hands moved with surgical precision to locate a cluster of nerve endings at the base of Vextar's neck, just above where his natural armor plates connected to his biomechanical enhancement ports. The warrior's enhanced biology had strengthened every part of his body, except for this one small area. It was a design flaw that hegemony engineers had never considered, because no opponent had ever been precise enough to target such a tiny weakness. But human hands, evolved for tool use and fine manipulation, were capable of incredible accuracy when properly trained. Hyunwoo applied pressure to the nerve cluster with exactly the right amount of force. Too little would have no effect on the enhanced warrior. Too much could cause permanent damage that would violate his rules of engagement. But the precise pressure he used sent a shockwave through Vextar's entire nervous system. The warrior's biomechanical systems shut down instantly as his body's natural defenses responded to what they perceived as a critical system failure. His enhanced strength vanished. His combat chemicals stopped flowing. His energy reserves switched to emergency mode to protect his vital organs. Vextar found himself completely paralyzed, unable to move any part of his body except his eyes. His multiple limbs hung useless at his sides as his nervous system struggled to process what had happened. The proud warrior who had dominated battlefields across the galaxy was now as helpless as a newly hatched infant. The corridor fell completely silent as the watching aliens tried to understand what they had just witnessed. The massive hegemony warrior stood frozen like a statue while the small human remained in perfect control of the situation. It was a reversal of power that challenged everything they thought they knew about the natural order of things. Hyunwoo maintained his grip on the nerve cluster for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to prove his point, but not long enough to cause lasting harm. Then he stepped back and watched as Vextar's systems slowly came back online. The warrior's translator was the first thing to reactivate, and the words that came through it shocked everyone present. "Please," Vextar said, his voice filled with something that no one had ever heard from a hegemony warrior before. "Please, I surrender. I beg for mercy." The proud alien who had started this confrontation by insulting humanity was now pleading with a human for his life. His enhanced biology told him that he was completely at the mercy of this small creature, who had demonstrated abilities that his science could not explain. Hyunwoo looked down at the defeated warrior with calm, steady eyes. Around them, the crowd of aliens began to whisper among themselves as news of what had happened started to spread through the station's communication networks. Within minutes, every being on Unity Prime would know that a human had defeated a hegemony warrior in single combat. But the true consequences of this encounter were only beginning to unfold. The words echoed through the corridor like thunder. "Please, I surrender. I beg for mercy." The proud voice of Vextar, one of the galaxy's most feared warriors, carried a tone that none of the watching aliens had ever heard before. A hegemony warrior was begging a human for his life. Hyunwoo stood perfectly still for a moment, his hand still positioned near the nerve cluster that had completely disabled his opponent. The human's face showed no anger or satisfaction, only the calm professionalism of a soldier who had completed his mission. He spoke quietly, his words clear enough for everyone to hear. "The diplomat you attacked carries important documents for her people. You will apologize to her and allow her to continue her duties without interference." Vextar's multiple eyes moved frantically as his systems slowly came back online. Feeling began to return to his arms and legs, but he made no attempt to move. The warrior had felt the precision of the human's technique and knew that another touch to that nerve cluster could leave him permanently disabled. "I apologize," Vextar said through his translator, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong to interfere with diplomatic business. I will not block her path again." Ji-Hai stepped forward from behind the security team, her diplomatic case clutched tightly in her hands. She looked up at the massive alien warrior who had seemed so threatening just minutes before. Now he appeared almost fragile despite his enhanced armor and biomechanical improvements. "Apology accepted," she said formally. "I hope this incident will not damage relations between our peoples." Hyunwoo nodded once and stepped away from Vextar, giving the warrior room to move. The aliens' biomechanical systems completed their reboot sequence with a series of soft beeps and clicks. Slowly, carefully, the warrior straightened to his full height, but he kept his forearms at his sides and made no aggressive movements. The crowd of watching aliens began to disperse, but they moved slowly as if reluctant to leave the scene of such an extraordinary event. Many pulled out communication devices to contact friends and colleagues throughout the station. Others activated recording equipment to capture images of the human who had accomplished the impossible. Among the observers, a tall figure in flowing robes pushed through the crowd. This was Ambassador Cathara of the Zentari delegation, one of the most respected diplomatic minds in the galaxy. Her species was known for their ability to analyze complex situations and predict their long-term consequences. The ambassador approached Hyunwoo with careful, measured steps. Her translator converted her words into perfect human speech patterns. "Lieutenant Commander, I am Ambassador Cathara. What you have done here today will have consequences that reach far beyond this station." Hyunwoo turned to face the ambassador with the same calm attention he had shown throughout the encounter. "I was simply doing my job, Ambassador. Protecting diplomatic personnel is part of my duties." "Your job," she repeated, her large eyes studying the human with intense curiosity. "You speak as if defeating a hegemony warrior in combat is a routine task. Do you understand what you have accomplished?" Before Hyunwoo could answer, another voice cut through the conversation. "What he has accomplished is impossible." The speaker was Commander Zalthor of the Hegemony Military Liaison Office. His armor was even more elaborate than Vextar's, marking him as a senior officer in the warrior caste. Zalthor moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone accustomed to others stepping out of his way. His forearms were positioned in formal military parade stance, but his multiple eyes burned with barely controlled anger. Behind him followed 3 other hegemony warriors, their biomechanical systems humming with readiness. "Vextar," the commander said, his translator broadcasting his words to everyone present. "Explain how you were defeated by an unenhanced primitive." The defeated warrior straightened even more, trying to regain some of his lost dignity. "Commander, the human used techniques that our training did not prepare us for. He targeted vulnerabilities in our biomechanical integration points that should not have been accessible to an unenhanced being." Commander Zalthor's eyes narrowed as he studied Hyunwoo from head to toe. The human stood at relaxed attention, showing no fear despite being outnumbered 4-1 by enhanced alien warriors. This calm confidence only made the commander more suspicious. "Impossible," Zalthor repeated. "Humans have no enhancements, no genetic modifications, no biomechanical improvements. They are one of the weakest species in the galaxy. There must be some trick or deception involved." Ambassador Cathara stepped between the hegemony commander and the human. Her diplomatic training allowed her to recognize the signs of escalating tension. "Commander Zalthor, I witnessed this encounter from beginning to end. There was no trick or deception. The human defeated your warrior through skill and knowledge alone." "Knowledge," the commander said with contempt. "What knowledge could a primitive species possess that we do not?" It was Hyunwoo who answered, his voice calm and educational rather than boastful. "We know how to adapt. Your warrior fought using patterns and techniques that work against other enhanced beings. But we are not enhanced. We fight differently because we had to learn differently." The explanation only made Zalthor more angry. "You claim that weakness is strength. That being primitive is an advantage. This is nonsense, not weakness," Hyunwoo corrected. "Adaptability. On our world, we had to survive without natural weapons or armor. We learned to use intelligence instead of strength, precision instead of power, flexibility instead of rigid training." Around them, the crowd had grown larger as news of the confrontation spread through the station. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to witness what might become a much larger conflict. The tension between the hegemony warriors and the single human was building toward a breaking point. Vextar, still recovering from his defeat, looked between his commander and the human who had bested him. Despite his shame, he found himself curious about the techniques that had proven so effective against him. "Human," he said quietly. Your fighting methods are unlike anything in our databases. Where did you learn such precise knowledge of anatomy and pressure points? Every human soldier learns anatomy, Hyunwoo replied. We study the weak points of our own bodies so we can understand the weak points of others. We practice on each other to build resistance and learn new techniques. Pain is our teacher, not our enemy. Commander Zalthor made a sound of disgust. You practice hurting your own kind. This proves that humans are barbaric and uncivilized. We practice because we must, Hyunwoo said simply. Our world is dangerous. Our enemies are strong. If we do not learn to fight effectively, we die. It is that simple. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of station security forces. A mixed unit of aliens from various species surrounded the area, their energy weapons visible but not yet activated. The leader, a tall being with crystalline skin, spoke through a translator that projected his words for everyone to hear. This gathering is creating a disturbance in the commercial district. All parties will disperse immediately or face detention. Ambassador Kethera stepped forward to address the security chief. There has been a misunderstanding, Captain. The situation is now under control. But Commander Zalthor was not ready to let the matter end so easily. His pride and the pride of his entire species had been challenged by this impossible defeat. He looked at Hyunwoo with eyes full of calculation and planning. This is not over, human, he said through his translator. We will study your methods. We will understand your weaknesses. The hegemony does not accept defeat from primitive species. Hyunwoo met the commander's gaze with steady eyes. I hope you do study our methods, Commander. Understanding between our peoples can only help prevent future conflicts. As the crowd began to disperse and the security forces moved the various parties away from each other, Ambassador Kethera remained beside Hyunwoo. Her analytical mind was already working through the implications of what she had witnessed. Lieutenant Commander, she said quietly, what happened here today will change how the galaxy views humanity. Are your people prepared for that change? Hyunwoo looked around the corridor where aliens from dozens of worlds were still discussing what they had seen. He could see the mixture of fear, respect, and curiosity in their eyes. The comfortable anonymity that humanity had enjoyed as newcomers to galactic society was about to end forever. 6 hours after the confrontation in the commercial district, the entire Unity Prime station buzzed with activity. News of the fight had spread through every level and section of the massive space facility. Aliens who had never heard of humans before were now asking questions about the small species that had produced such an unexpected warrior. In the hegemony military sector, Commander Zalthor stood before a wall of screens displaying combat footage from security cameras. He had watched the encounter between Vextar and the human dozens of times, analyzing every movement and technique. What he saw challenged everything he thought he knew about effective combat. The other hegemony officers in the room watched their commander with growing concern. Zalthor had not spoken for over an hour. He simply stared at the screens, rewinding and replaying the same sequences over and over again. His biomechanical enhancements hummed quietly as his enhanced brain processed the impossible data. Sir, one of the junior officers finally said, the combat analysis is complete. The human used no technology, no enhancements, and no weapons. He defeated Vextar using only physical techniques and knowledge of anatomy. I can see that, Zalthor replied without taking his eyes off the screens. What I cannot understand is how such techniques could be effective against our enhancements. Our biomechanical systems are designed to overcome any natural fighting ability. On the screens, they watched Hyunwoo move with fluid precision around Vextar's attacks. The human's movements looked almost like a dance, flowing from one position to another without wasted motion. Every step, every block, every counterattack served multiple purposes that their combat analysis programs could barely track. Perhaps, another officer suggested carefully, we should request additional information about human combat training. Our databases on Earth species are very limited. Zalthor finally turned away from the screens, his multiple eyes focused on the officer who had spoken. Yes, send a priority message to the Hegemony Intelligence Division. I want everything they can find about human military training, anatomy, and fighting techniques. If this species poses a threat to our dominance, we need to understand them immediately. Meanwhile, in the coalition diplomatic sector, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. Representatives from over 30 species had gathered in the main conference chamber, to discuss the implications of what had happened. The room was filled with beings of every imaginable shape and size, all talking at once in dozens of different languages. Ambassador Cathara stood at the center of the chaos, her calm voice cutting through the noise. "Order, please. We need to discuss this situation rationally and carefully." "Rationally?" shouted a representative from the Gorlan Trade Federation. "A human just defeated a hegemony warrior in single combat. There is nothing rational about that." "Perhaps that is the problem," said a quiet voice from the back of the room. All heads turned to see Admiral Tae Min, the senior human military officer on the station. He had arrived just minutes before, having been called from Earth after emergency reports reached the home planet. The Admiral was older than Hyunwoo, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of many years of difficult decisions. He wore the simple blue uniform of the Earth Space Navy, with none of the elaborate decorations that mark the clothing of other species representatives. "Admiral," Ambassador Cathara said with relief, "thank you for coming so quickly. We need to understand what happened today and what it means for galactic relations." Tae Min walked slowly to the front of the room, his presence commanding attention despite his unremarkable appearance. "What happened today was a misunderstanding that escalated into conflict. My officer was protecting a diplomat as he was trained to do. Nothing more, nothing less, nothing more," the Gorlan representative's translator squeaked with indignation. "Your officer made a hegemony warrior beg for mercy. Do you understand what this means?" "It means," Tae Min replied calmly, "that my people take the protection of diplomatic personnel very seriously. It also means that we do not back down from bullies regardless of their size or enhancements." A murmur ran through the assembled representatives. Some species had dealt with hegemony aggression for centuries, but had never been strong enough to resist. The idea that humans might be willing and able to stand up to the galaxy's most powerful military force was both exciting and terrifying. "Admiral," a representative from the peaceful Yithran collective spoke up, "we must ask about your species' military capabilities. Are all human soldiers capable of such feats?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every being in the room waited for the answer, knowing that it could change the balance of power throughout the galaxy. Some hoped that humans might offer protection from aggressive species. Others worried that humanity itself might become the next galactic threat. Tae Min considered his words carefully before responding. "Every human soldier receives training in hand-to-hand combat. We believe that a warrior who cannot fight with his bare hands is not truly a warrior at all. But Lieutenant Commander Hyunwoo is special. Even among our special forces, he represents the best of human military training. How many soldiers like him does Earth have?" pressed the Gorlan representative. "Enough," Tae Min replied simply, offering no specifics that might be used against his people. Back in the human quarters, Hyunwoo sat quietly in his small room writing his official report of the incident. He had been excused from duty for the rest of the day, while station administrators dealt with the political fallout from his confrontation with Vextar. A soft chime at his door announced a visitor. Hyunwoo opened it to find Vextar standing in the corridor, looking smaller somehow without his aggressive posture and combat-ready stance. The hegemony warrior's biomechanical systems were powered down to minimum levels, and his forearms hung loosely at his sides. "May I enter?" Vextar asked through his translator. "I wish to speak with you about what happened today." Hyunwoo stepped aside to allow the massive alien into his quarters. The room was barely large enough for both of them, forcing Vextar to crouch slightly to avoid hitting his head on the ceiling. "I have been thinking about our fight," the warrior said, his translator converting his words into soft, respectful tones. "I have analyzed every technique you used, every movement you made. I cannot understand how you knew exactly where to strike to disable my enhancements. I studied your people before coming to this station," Hyunwoo replied honestly. "It is standard procedure for human soldiers to learn about potential threats and allies. Your biomechanical integration points are described in several technical manuals that are available to coalition military personnel." Vextar's multiple eyes widened in surprise. "You learned to defeat me from technical manuals?" "Partly," Hyunwoo confirmed. "But mostly I learned by watching how you moved and fought. Every fighting style has patterns. Every enhancement system has limitations. My training taught me to observe and adapt." The alien warrior was silent for a long moment, processing this information. In hegemony society, Combat techniques were closely guarded secrets passed down through generations of warriors. The idea that an enemy could learn effective countermeasures simply by reading and observation was revolutionary. "Would you," Vextar said hesitantly, "be willing to teach me some of these techniques? I have never encountered fighting methods like yours. My people could benefit from understanding them." Yunwu studied the alien warrior carefully. This request was unexpected and potentially significant. If the hegemony was willing to learn from humans rather than simply trying to dominate them, it could change the entire relationship between their species. "I would need permission from my superiors," Yunwu said finally, "but I am not opposed to the idea. Learning from each other could prevent future misunderstandings." Vextar bowed his head in gratitude, a gesture that would have shocked his fellow warriors if they had seen it. A hegemony warrior was asking a human for knowledge, acknowledging that his supposedly superior species had something to learn from the newcomers. As word of these private meetings and diplomatic discussions spread throughout the station, other species began to reconsider their own relationships with humanity. The Zentari started planning cultural exchange programs. The Gorlan Federation began drafting new trade proposals. Even the isolationist Void Speakers sent observers to study human behavior and capabilities. But the most significant change was happening in the minds of individual beings throughout the galaxy. For the first time in thousands of years, the hegemony did not seem invincible. If humans could defeat their warriors, perhaps other species could stand up to their aggression as well. The age of unquestioned hegemony dominance was beginning to crack, and the sound of that crack was heard in every corner of galactic civilization. 6 months had passed since the confrontation on Unity Prime, and the galaxy was a different place. News of the fight between Yunwu and Vextar had traveled to every inhabited world within Coalition space and beyond. The story had grown in the telling, becoming legend among some species and nightmare among others. On Earth, Admiral Taman stood in the command center of the new Galactic Defense Headquarters, watching reports stream in from stations throughout human space. What had started as a small diplomatic presence had expanded into a major military and cultural exchange program. Dozens of alien species were now requesting meetings, trade agreements, and military cooperation with humanity. "Admiral," his aide reported, "we have received another formal alliance proposal. This one is from the Kelter Republic. They are offering exclusive mining rights to their crystal worlds in exchange for human military advisors." Taman nodded thoughtfully. The Kelter had been dominated by hegemony expansion for over 50 years. Now they saw an opportunity to regain their independence with human help. It was the 5th such proposal this week alone. "What is the status of our training programs?" the Admiral asked. "Currently running at full capacity, sir. We have 300 human instructors working with forces from 22 different species. The demand for training keeps growing faster than we can meet it." The transformation had been remarkable. Species that had never considered standing up to hegemony aggression were now actively preparing to defend themselves. The knowledge that enhanced warriors could be defeated by skill and intelligence had sparked a revolution in military thinking throughout the galaxy. On Unity Prime, Yunwu continued his duties as security chief for the human delegation. But his role had expanded far beyond what anyone had originally planned. He now spent half his time meeting with military officers from various species who wanted to understand human combat techniques. His quarters had been moved to a larger space to accommodate the constant stream of visitors. The walls were covered with anatomy charts and tactical diagrams from dozens of different species. What had begun as a simple security assignment had become the foundation for a new type of galactic military science. A soft chime announced another visitor. Yunwu opened the door to find Vextar waiting in the corridor, as he did every Tuesday and Thursday for their regular training sessions. The hegemony warrior looked different now. His biomechanical enhancements had been modified to incorporate some of the flexibility principles he had learned from human fighting techniques. "Good morning, Instructor," Vextar said through his translator. The title still felt strange to both of them, but it had become natural over the months of training. "Good morning, Vextar. Are you ready for today's lesson?" The alien warrior nodded eagerly. Their sessions had become legendary among the station's inhabitants. A hegemony warrior learning combat techniques from the human who had defeated him was a sight that never failed. To draw crowds of curious observers, they made their way to the training facility that had been specially constructed for interspecies combat practice. The room was large enough to accommodate beings of various sizes and equipped with safety systems that could handle the enhanced strength of different alien species. As they entered the training area, Hyunwoo noticed that their usual audience had grown significantly. Representatives from at least a dozen species stood along the walls watching with intense interest. Among them was Ambassador Cathara, who had become a regular observer of these sessions. "Today we will work on adaptive response patterns," Hyunwoo announced to both his student and the watching crowd. "The key principle is that every opponent will try to use their greatest strength against you. Your job is to turn that strength into a weakness." Vextar activated his biomechanical systems and moved into a ready position. Over the months of training, he had learned to suppress his enhanced aggression chemicals, allowing his natural intelligence to guide his movements instead of relying purely on programmed responses. The sparring match that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Vextar used his traditional hegemony techniques, but adapted them based on human principles of flexibility and precision. Hyunwoo responded with new combinations that incorporated what he had learned about alien anatomy and psychology. Neither warrior was trying to win or lose. Instead, they were exploring the boundaries of what was possible when different fighting philosophies were combined. The watching crowd took notes and recorded everything, knowing that they were witnessing the birth of a new era in galactic combat. After the session ended, Ambassador Cathara approached Hyunwoo with a serious expression on her face. Her analytical mind had been processing the implications of what she had been observing for months. "Lieutenant Commander," she said quietly, "I need to discuss something important with you. The Zentari Intelligence Council has been monitoring galactic reactions to your innovations. We have identified some concerning developments." Hyunwoo followed the ambassador to a private meeting room where they could speak without being overheard. The walls were lined with Zentari acoustic dampeners that would prevent any listening devices from picking up their conversation. "What kind of developments?" Hyunwoo asked. "Several aggressive species have begun developing new enhancement technologies specifically designed to counter human fighting techniques. The Skarn Empire has created warriors with additional nerve clusters to prevent the type of paralysis you used on Vextar. The Void Raiders are experimenting with distributed nervous systems that cannot be disabled by pressure point attacks." Hyunwoo considered this information carefully. It was not unexpected that other species would try to adapt to human methods, just as humans had adapted to alien capabilities. The cycle of military evolution was as old as war itself. "There is more," the ambassador continued. "Some species are becoming concerned that humans are becoming too influential in galactic military affairs. They worry that your people might use their growing influence to dominate others, just as the hegemony has done." "And what do the Zentari think?" Hyunwoo asked. "We think that change is inevitable and usually beneficial in the long term. But we also think that humans need to be careful about how they use their newfound influence. Power that comes too quickly can be dangerous for those who wield it, and those who must live with its consequences." That evening, Hyunwoo sent a priority message to Admiral Taemin, reporting on his conversation with Ambassador Cathara. The response came back within hours, summoning him to Earth for high-level strategic discussions about humanity's future role in galactic affairs. As he prepared to leave Unity Prime, Hyunwoo reflected on how much had changed since that day in the commercial district. What had started as a simple confrontation with an aggressive alien had grown into something that was reshaping the entire galaxy. He thought about the responsibility that came with being the person who had started this transformation. Every species that gained the confidence to stand up to oppression, every warrior who learned new techniques, every alliance that formed between formerly dominated peoples. They all traced back to 3 seconds when he had put his hand on a nerve cluster at the base of a hegemony warrior's neck. Vextar came to see him off at the docking bay. The alien warrior had become something like a friend over the months of their training sessions. Their relationship had evolved from antagonist to student and teacher to mutual respect between professionals. "The techniques you have taught me will spread throughout the hegemony military," Vextar said through his translator. "My people are beginning to understand that there is strength in learning from others rather than simply dominating them." "Learning never stops," Hyunwoo replied. "I have learned as much from you as you have from me. That is what makes us both stronger." As his transport ship pulled away from Unity Prime, Hyunwoo looked back at the massive station where everything had changed. Ships from dozens of worlds were docked at its ports, and he could see the construction of new sections designed to accommodate the growing diplomatic and military exchanges between species. The galaxy was becoming a more connected place, bound together not by the dominance of a single military power, but by the sharing of knowledge and the mutual recognition that every species had something valuable to contribute. It was not the future that anyone had planned, but it might be the future that everyone needed. On the bridge of the transport, the human captain smiled as he watched the diplomatic ships moving between Unity Prime and the various homeworlds. Quite a view, isn't it, Commander? Who would have thought that one fight could change so much? Hyunwoo nodded as he watched alien ships that had once been enemies now flying in formation together. Sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences. We just have to be ready to adapt to whatever comes next. The ship turned toward Earth, carrying with it the lessons and responsibilities of a species that had found its place among the stars, not through conquest or submission, but through the simple act of standing up for what was right when it mattered most.